Welcome to Grappling with the Gray, a forum for promoting an ethical mindset and ethical decision-making to help us more clearly see both sides of complex issues and better navigate the moral challenges of everyday life. I'm Rabbi Yonason Goldson, and I would like to introduce my guest today. With me is William Attaway, who is an executive coach, speaker, and podcaster, helping 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs, C-suite leaders, and agency owners achieve clear-minded focus, calm, control, and confidence. Mark O'Brien is founder and principal of O'Brien Communications Group, a B2B management and marketing communications firm, and host of The Anxious Voyage, a syndicated radio show about life's trials and triumphs. And Sue Tinnish is an executive coach, employing a unique blend of soft skills and technical knowledge, as well as a peer leaders group chair with Vistage Worldwide Incorporated. Thank you all for being with me today.
Thank you.
And here is our topic. On June 20th, President Trump told the world he would decide, quote, within the next 2 weeks, unquote, whether to strike Iran. 2 days later, B-2 stealth bombers dropped 30-ton bombs in an effort to cripple Iran's nuclear program. It was a head fake, a Trump advisor told Axios. He knew the media couldn't resist amplifying. He knew the Iranians might think he was bluffing. Well, everyone was wrong. The president wanted to buy time, another advisor said. He knew what he wanted to do, and he knows he can't look eager for war. So all the folks in MAGA urging restraint gave him some space. At the same time, Trump remained open to aborting the mission if a diplomatic window emerged. For purposes of this discussion, let's assume that eliminating Iran's nuclear capability was a wise and defensible decision. But what about the president's use of deception and disinformation to do it? If a leader can benefit his people, in this case possibly saving many lives, through misdirection, does that justify doing so? Or could the long-term loss to future credibility outweigh the short-term benefits? If he lies about this, will people not wonder what else he's lying about? The floor is open.
I have to tell you that the very first thing I wondered when I read what you just read to us was if the Greek population was offended or wary in some way because they weren't told about the horse that was going to be wheeled into Troy. And I also want to share, actually, it's two parts of one other thing. Have you ever heard of Operation Mincemeat? And I learned today that actually a movie was made of this in the 40s called The Man Who Never Was. This is a more historical and more detailed version of the same story. But this move, while it was certainly subterfuge, was strategic. And so I just wonder, generally speaking, if we can or should apply the same sort of ethical thinking to it.
No, it's interesting you mentioned that, Mark. I almost put D-Day in the introductory remarks for the same reason. There was an elaborate hoax perpetrated to make it seem as if Patton was launching the D-Day offensive from Dover towards Calais instead of Normandy. You mentioned the man who never was, that was tricking the Germans into thinking we'd be landing on Sardinia instead of Sicily, which worked brilliantly. The first thing that occurred to me is that those did involve withholding information as opposed to misinformation or disinformation. And maybe that makes a difference, maybe it doesn't. What do you think?
Well, it's interesting to think about the different stakeholder groups and like who are you really trying to misdirect with the information that you're sharing, and does that change the scenario for how you think about it? So thinking about trying to be strategic, as you suggested, Mark, by having a perceived enemy think one way when we're going to operate in a different, might be very different than the kind of putting out of disinformation to your employees, to your team, or to other stakeholder groups around you. So I think that nuance just adds to the conversation.
When I first read this, I thought about D-Day as well. That was the very first thing I flashed to. But you know what is different today than was not true then? And that is the 24-hour news cycle. That's the proliferation of news across social media, the internet, CNN. This did not exist back then. And it is used in such a way that people on the opposing side will watch the headlines. They'll watch the news and try to glean intelligence through those open source methods. Thus, on this side, doesn't that have to be taken into account? Isn't that part of the strategy of warfare? That's the first thing that flashed into my head.
I think it has to be considered in contemporary warfare. And honestly, I don't have any idea what 2 weeks might have made to Iran and whatever they might have planned to do if they didn't know they were going to get bombed in 2 days. But I also want to pick up on what you said, Sue, about nuance, because I thought that was brilliant. And when you said nuance and you were talking about deliberations like this in corporate environments, the word I wrote down next was stakes. I think we have to consider what the stakes are or what is at stake. So there's considerably more subtlety involved in it than I initially thought, I would say.
Well, I certainly hope we talk about this at this level, but then also start to think about what does it mean for leadership, at a more manageable level, not leading a country, but leading an organization. But it's interesting to start to think, do the ends justify the means? And so, do we take from an ethical standpoint, do we take more of a consequential perspective, which is the ends are certainly important, or do we take a deontological, perspective, which is really we need to guide our decisions by ethical principles?
And to that,
And maybe someone can come up with a concrete example of this. I'm thinking abstractly, but imagine that a company is facing a potential crisis, and that by publicizing it, even in-house, that could accelerate the likelihood of the crisis escalating, while at the same time it's giving people a chance to prepare for it should it happen. So now you're weighing the possibility of making things worse with the responsibility to let people prepare.
In that case, it occurs to me that the worst thing that could happen would be to escalate the fear of whatever this potential thing might be, as opposed to somehow, and this goes to your point about leadership, Sue, encouraging people to do whatever might need to be done, to conduct themselves in a way that might preclude that potentiality from coming to be. It's probably in the way it's handled, which is the leadership part.
We live in an
trust.
environment. Yeah, yeah, exactly. I was just going to say, our employees these days are expecting much more transparent leadership and this heavy emphasis on trust. And trust is so fragile. And once it's broken, how do you begin to repair that? And what are, you're talking about long-term consequences, but what are the long-term consequences of destroying trust in your organization?
Well, trust is a foundational.
Not to mention with your external customers, clients, other stakeholders. Your
I think trust is foundational. It's a foundational currency for a leader. A leader who does not have that currency is going to find themselves very quickly thrust out of that role, either in reality or in the relational aspect of what they do. How does one build trust? Part of that, I believe, is knowing when appropriate disclosure is mandated and when it's important to determine what is disclosed. Not every leader discloses everything about everything that they lead.
Or should.
Or should. That's right. And so part of the discretion and the discernment that is necessary is determining what to disclose to whom when.
So it becomes this trade-off between, William, as you're saying, like, where does the importance of our strategic advantage lie versus potentially not disclosing and being fully authentic?
And as you said,
100%.
trust is earned over an extended period of time.
Yes.
Once it is earned, then I might be able to say, as a trusted leader, trust me on this.
Right.
And
It
if
can be
I've earned
spent.
that, right?
Yeah, it can be spent in those moments, right?
Yeah, if I've earned it, then I'll get it. Where I remember reading this, and this will date me more than a little, but George H.W. Bush, George the First, one of his campaign slogans, the famous one was "Read my lips, no new taxes."
That's right.
And a year later, he raised taxes.
Right.
Because he came face to face with a reality, the economic reality that he couldn't ignore. But somebody compared him to Ronald Reagan as governor of California, who had said that his feet were in concrete. There would be no new taxes. And he went on the air and he said, "The sound you hear is the concrete crumbling beneath my feet." And I remember that the writers said the difference was that Reagan had a long history of being a defender of lower taxes. So when he said that there was no choice but to do this, people accepted it because he'd earned their trust. Whereas Bush, who had just come into office on this slogan, he really destroyed his own credibility.
So I wonder if, as so many things do, this comes down to a matter of definition. And I'm thinking about that specifically, William, in response to your comment about appropriate disclosure. How is that defined, and who gets to define it? And I'm just going to ask a question, and I'm going to ask you to trust me that it's not utterly tangential. As a younger person, did you ever do or know something that you were positive your parents couldn't handle, so you didn't disclose it? And I will tell you, I did. I did it on more than one occasion, and on every occasion, I was wrong. So I think the definitions are absolutely critical, and who gets to make them, and are they necessarily always circumstantial?
Well, and it really speaks to not only we're asking people to put trust in us as a leader, but how much trust do we put in our followers and
Yeah.
their ability to
Yeah.
grasp the truth, grasp the enormity of the decision, grasp the seriousness of the overall situation.
That's a very good point. And in the topic at hand, I think it's important to look at the polarization that has become the political sphere. You know, I live about an hour west of DC in Northern Virginia. What I believe to be some of the most politicized real estate in the world, this whole area, right? You can't throw a rock without hitting somebody who works for the government or who works for a contractor who works for the government. And everybody's got opinions. And I wonder how much that polarization has played into this as well, because the people who are going to be supporters of one party are going to see that it's wrong no matter what. And the people who are avid proponents of the other party are going to see that it's right no matter what, because of there's a trust or a lack of trust. And that really colors the entire situation. I wonder how much of that is inherent in this topic.
I think that's a really insightful point, William. I would assert that it's really a lack of trust. People today, I believe, are much more likely to form their opinions on what they're against than what they're for.
Yes.
And I think that adds a layer of peril to our political circumstance.
I'd add, sort of two additional comments. I mean, first of all, you're in the situation that we're talking about, that we set up this scenario. We have the media as a huge overlay in terms of what's
Right.
happening.
Yep.
Whereas in other situations, a leader can control some of the communication that occurs. So I think that's just a whole nother power play about the situation.
Yeah, and I think that that's an interesting element to this conversation because I think most of us believe that the media is largely unreliable and untrustworthy. Today, I frequently say I used to listen to Fox News and or watch Fox News and listen to NPR in an effort to try to get balanced views, and I can't stand either one of them anymore. I don't really know what to do, but if we've lost trust in the media, does that give us more license to manipulate the media, to use the media as a device in confusing our allies?
Yeah, play to it.
Yeah.
It certainly illustrates the shadow side of leadership.
Well, and I think the media also has an issue in terms of just thinking about the biases, the heuristic biases that exist, because we all make decisions, but there's a huge tendency for confirmation bias. And so the media only feeds into that. Like what I'm reading on this side confirms, and then what I'm reading on this side doesn't confirm.
That's right.
And I coach leaders all the time about making sure that they try to avoid confirmation bias, that they need the diversity of opinion and before they make their decisions.
William, you made a comment about the adjective was shadow. Did you say shadow leadership?
The shadow side of leadership.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's it. Thank you.
Yeah.
What if what we might refer to as the shadow side of leadership has positive outcomes in some cases?
What are you thinking, Mark?
Well, I guess we could use the example from this show. We could argue that if we decide that President Trump was disingenuous, that might be the shadow side of leadership. But I think the outcome was better than it would have been if he had given Iran time to prepare for what was coming. Again, not having any idea what difference 2 weeks might have made. So again, and I don't even want to take a side, but I guess I'm preoccupied with definitions always. How do we decide what is the shadow side of leadership?
Words definitely matter in this conversation. They really do. I think wasn't it Machiavelli who came up with the whole concept of the end justifying the means and wrote extensively about this. This is a danger, I think, that we can say, well, the end result was good, however we got there. Dismiss that.
Yeah.
That to me that makes me very nervous.
Well,
because
I would say it certainly lends itself to shadow.
It does. How you say a thing, I believe, matters as much as what you say. How you do a thing matters as much as what you do.
No question about it. I'm reminded of Will Rogers when he took his trip to Europe in 1926. He came back and people asked him, well, what's the best form of leadership? He said, that's easy. Dictatorship.
That's right.
So,
benevolent dictatorship.
That's find the right dictator.
That's right. Most efficient form of government ever, the benevolent dictator.
Yeah, they're in short supply.
Well, and this concept of shadow and just even the topic of this podcast, Yonason, is about gray. And so there's many shades of gray. And so I think what you're starting to say, William, is there's a slippery slope.
There is.
How do you avoid, either through the use of principles and values or definitions or clearer communication, how do you avoid that slippery slope?
Well, and that begs the question that I have for you guys as I was thinking about this. How is it appropriate to superimpose a personal ethic or a personal morality when you're thinking about deception versus full transparency onto a nation state?
That invites the do the ends justify the means question, doesn't it? I
Well, I think it raises a question that I hate really, which is who decides?
Mhm.
And
Right.
but the problem is somebody has to decide. You
That's
know,
right.
if we abdicate, it's just like I'm working in my current column right now and talking about the term non-judgmentalism, which I think is dangerously misused and misapplied. We always make judgments. We have to make judgments.
Yes. That's
The
right.
question is, how impulsive are we? How much information do we have? Are we willing to question our own biases and whether we're really in a position to be able to make reasonable evaluations? But that is the job of leadership.
Mhm.
And what I think has really gotten lost is that the United States is not a democracy; it's a democratic republic, which
Right.
is supposed to mean that we vote for people we trust to make
Yes.
decisions. Which brings us back to that trust issue. If there's no one to trust, how do we vote?
And
Except
and
against
both
the
in
candidates at
this,
work.
yeah, and both in decision making and in trust, there's
Mhm.
some level of cognitive, there's a cognitive decision, there's an affective decision, how do I feel? And then there's kind of a gut decision too.
Mhm. And both are important.
Yeah.
Intuition is a leader's great friend, right? I mean, you don't want to lose that, but you also can't use it solo. It's got to be coupled with the data. If you couple intuition and data, then you are far more than likely to move toward a good leadership decision. When it
that
comes to voting, yeesh, how
that
do
that,
you handle that?
that leads me back to thinking about cognitive bias.
Mm,
Um, I don't know which question to ask first. Either how do you become aware of your own cognitive bias, or how do you overcome it? It seems to me you can't if you don't become aware of it. But wow, that one feels slippery.
Well, that's what trusted advisors are for, right?
True. True. I was trying to decide if I was gonna share this, but I will. There's a gentleman, and if you can believe it, he's even older than me. And I know, I almost stayed in bed after I read what he wrote because I knew. Anyway, he wrote a Substack column, and it published this Sunday, and no, I'm sorry, Saturday, and he said some things in it. The idea of democracy was one of them. At any rate, I also recognized, and I knew before I read the column, that this gentleman and I are at polar opposites of the political line. So it occurred to me that we had an opportunity, because I have a Substack account too, and I'll be the first to admit that I can be deliberately sarcastic and bordering on caustic. And anyway, so I wrote to this gentleman and I said to him, look, I think we have an opportunity here because you're over here and I'm over here, but we pay lip service constantly to meeting in the middle. Maybe we can do that. And if I am willing to find or create a forum in which we can do that, would you be willing to participate? So his
mm,
first response was yes. So I spent a good portion of the day on Sunday trying to figure out what to do about this. I wanted to find a domain name that I could use for a website. I came up with one. I registered the domain and I started to build the site. And then I shared it with him on Sunday afternoon. And he called me Monday morning and he said no. He didn't want to be involved. I couldn't believe it. So, I mean, I think it goes back to cognitive bias and shadow. If you have the opportunity to at least recognize both, what does it mean if you turn it down?
it,
Mm.
it's, if you accept it, it's hard. It's hard to listen to people that don't believe exactly the way you believe. And it's hard to admit that, especially the more experience and maturity we have, that we potentially need to keep growing and changing. And transformation and change is not easy. And let's just even think about it in the political arena where people are said, oh, well, they flip-flopped, like as if we're not supposed to change our mind about an issue. That's kind of
Right.
scary to me. But this person may have been just, scared off, quite frankly.
I guess. I even promised him I'd check my Irish at the door, and he didn't go for that either.
Did he give you any explanation?
What he said was he didn't want to invest the time.
Mm.
And to be candid, I thought that was weak, but I didn't challenge him. I actually thanked him for being forthright about it. He didn't lead me on. He didn't spend my time. So I had to respect that, and I thanked him for it.
That self-reflection is not easy. It's not easy to look in the mirror and really see something.
Mm-hmm.
And to admit that perhaps you have moved, like not necessarily that you've moved to the wrong position, but just that you're so entrenched in your position
Yeah.
that you
Yeah.
are able to just listen to someone else. That's difficult.
Mm-hmm.
The forerunner of this show was a podcast called The Rabbi and the Shrink, where I partnered with a psychologist, Margarita Gurry, where she had to withdraw for health reasons. But on one episode, we invited on a fellow. We become quite friendly since then. His name is Scott Mason. And I didn't even realize this until we were getting close to recording, that he was gay. And I reached out and I said, would you be interested in having a conversation about how a person who comes from biblical values and a person who is openly gay can still have civil discourse and collegial relationship? And he was all in. He was very excited by it. And we talked about how we do it. And at one point he asked me, could you get any blowback from your community on this? I said, oh yeah. He said, me too. And we did. We had about 20-minute segment on this, and I think it's the piece I'm most proud of in my podcasting career, because there are no apologies. We weren't apologizing for who we were or what we believed. We were simply explaining why we believe what we believe, why we are who we are, how we see ourselves, and why and how we can see beyond that
Mm-hmm.
and not make that the only element in the way we look at somebody else.
Well, and sorry, this goes back to definition. I mean, who gets to decide what the deal breaker is? And as you and Scott succeeded in doing, Yonason, you decided that difference could not be the deal breaker.
Yeah. What's the yardstick?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. What's the yardstick?
Yeah.
And is it that we can only learn from people who we agree with 100% of everything on? That's a very small circle.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I think, and I teach, you can learn from anybody if you walk into it with a teachable spirit. I'm learning from you guys in this hour. This is incredibly helpful for me to hear different perspectives. I want to be the most teachable person in every room I walk into, but that's a choice. It's a decision. We get to choose that or not. And I wonder if we would choose that and we would approach these conversations like what you're describing. Boy, I wonder if that act of intentionally listening and choosing not to be so focused on what I want to say next might not engender more trust, which would then become foundational to being able to make those hard decisions when we're not agreeing.
So this might actually come back to unconscious bias. Sorry. You said something earlier, William, which I completely agreed with about, you didn't put it quite this way, but the ubiquity of media.
Sure.
I wonder if there isn't a positive side to that because it, at the very least, has the potential to make us aware of the dangers of feedback loops and echo
Mm,
chambers.
that is
And
true.
I absolutely could not agree with you more. If we are just hanging with the people who agree with us always in all ways, the learning's over. I mean,
That's it.
we might get some kind of something like smug satisfaction out of it, but learning, not so much. Yeah, I like that point a lot. Thank you for that.
Mm,
That to me seems, it's that lack of ability to learn and be open. That's the kind of polarization that bothers me
Hmm.
mhm.
more than thinking about a specific issue being right or left. It's the polarization,
Yeah.
entrenchment of people's view. And as you said, William, that people are not necessarily willing to listen and be open to the fact that I could learn something from
Mhm.
the opposing side.
If we're secure in our own beliefs,
I was hoping that you would acknowledge that, Yonason. You are the man when it comes to that. And I'm
if
sorry,
we are,
I didn't mean to cut you off, William, but
no, no, no. I mean, if we are, then what is the harm in a conversation? You
no.
understand, like you, I'm a person of faith, right? And so scripture is the yardstick by which I make ethical decisions, right? I'm secure in that. And I've walked that journey for a very long time. But I don't expect other people to be in the same spot I am.
Right.
They have a different path, they have a different journey, they've had different experiences. I want to listen to what they have to say and I want to learn from them. But that doesn't mean I'm going to come at this with, such an open mind that my brain falls out.
Yeah. I should have mentioned this even earlier, rather than my own case with Scott, that, the most dramatic story that I know of this is Daryl Davis. And if you haven't seen his TED Talk, go watch it. Only has about 15 million views. Um,
Wow.
he's a Emmy nominated musician, Grammy nominated musician. Um, he's a black man, and he's got a fascinating backstory. But the punchline is he befriended the imperial wizard of the Ku Klux Klan,
Oh, wow.
and he never engaged him in debate. He simply developed a rapport. He would attend meetings,
Wow.
and um, eventually, after quite some time, this fellow resigned from the KKK. And Daryl Davis has I think he's influenced over 200 people to leave the Klan
Wow.
simply by being cordial, being open, giving them a chance to know him.
Wow.
And
So good.
I mean, it brings tears to your eyes. Um, and imagine if, we weren't so influenced by cable news that is driven solely by ratings. Um, and the more acrimonious and combative the dialogues can be, the better, because that's what gets people's adrenaline pumping, and that's what makes them stay. And it just leads us further and further into this kind of, you know, ideological chaos.
Um, when you said a few minutes ago, Sue, you said the word entrenchment. I was positive you were going to say unwillingness. And Sue said that in response to what you were saying, William. And my question, as you were saying what you were saying, was, what is it exactly that we're so afraid of? And I always sort of see this relationship in my head. Fear, ignorance breeds fear, which breeds hatred, which sometimes breeds violence. And as you were sharing the story just then, Jonas, and I was thinking about how remarkably disarming acceptance is. This man was willing to accept this other gentleman from the Ku Klux Klan, and apparently, given the fact that this man left the Klan, he must have somehow the question must have occurred to him. What what was I so afraid of? He's no threat to me. And then those other people who also left the Klan, maybe they came to the same realization. And it's that this is just so obvious, but that fear is such an element of the polarization that we get drawn into. Wasteful.
And somebody said that all fear comes from the unknown. It's fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
If I don't know you, if I don't understand you, then you are frightening.
Mm.
And I'll keep my distance, and then I'll create my own narrative, or I'll accept somebody else's narrative. And there's nowhere to go from there.
So that actually makes me wonder, do you have to be unafraid? I'm sorry, yes. Do you have to be unafraid to meet someone new, smile and say hello? I never think about that in terms of fear or lack thereof.
But think about it in terms of that, asking that question about your enemy. Do you have to be unafraid to approach your enemy and smile and put your hand out? I mean, we started this talking about something on the political arena. Like, imagine if this story could be, and how could it even be applied to the situation in the Middle East? It's extraordinary to think about it from on this minor level, but to think about it on a nationwide basis and for leaders to act this way, that's really extraordinary.
So does that invite the question, what are the odds that we'll ever see the Ayatollah in President Trump's office? All I'll say is I'm not going to bet too heavy on that one.
Well, it's all about that strategic advantage, right?
No, I'm with you all the way.
Well, I remember, and you mentioned William or Sue, that at what point do you say this person I'm unwilling to talk to this person? And I think there is a line, and maybe it's the famous Supreme Court, definition of pornography, right? That I don't know if I don't know if I can define it, but I know it when I see it. The politically extreme, radically extreme labels that we're all too familiar with. I mean, there comes a point where you are going to say that somebody is really too far, but then it flips back, because while I don't think there's any room to have a conversation with a hardcore Nazi, but we throw the term Nazi around so much that anybody who doesn't agree with me,
Right.
you immediately, well, what is it, Mark? Can I hear from you? Is it Godwin's principle? Right? In any ideological conversation, sooner or later, somebody's going to invoke the Holocaust.
It didn't come from me, but I may have heard that before.
Yeah, it's out there somewhere, and it's true.
Yeah.
You hear people leveling this charge of Nazi against just about everybody, and it's not only offensive to the person it's being used towards, because it's almost never accurate, but it's demeaning to all the victims of the Nazis.
Yes.
Because you're now reducing the level of evil to something that's pedestrian.
So this question of definition might be actually one of ethics as well. If we're going to determine that if we as individuals are going to determine that some other individual just can't be worked with, we're going to have to determine that that person is intractable. So A, how do we define that? And B, how do we know it's not a matter of timing? Maybe there was something else we could have done or tried.
And what is it based on? Is it based on your values or your view of reality?
Yeah.
What makes you determine that?
Well, I would throw in a C. As a leader, you have a responsibility for the people that you lead. And so at what point do you have to think of their welfare and their well-being, even beyond your own? At what point do you have to make decisions that may be unpopular by some, but are going to protect the people that you lead and others, even though you're not going to be roundly applauded for it?
Right.
So I just have to ask, is there an ethicist in the house?
Ever since I read that ethicists tend to be less ethical than average people,
Oh, no.
I've eschewed the title of ethicist. Um, uh, but I was actually I was at the airport not long ago, and I heard a conversation going on. The voices were a little more animated than one normally expects.
Mm.
And so I looked around and I tuned in, and there was a gentleman. I guess I would sort of call him a younger gentleman, but he looked like he was probably in his 40s, and he was talking to a group of teenagers, and it appeared it was something political going on.
Mm.
And then I heard him say, "This is the difference between me and you. We don't agree. I'd like to hear what you have to say. You have no interest in what I have to say."
Ooh.
Wow.
And then I saw that the conversation resumed, which was very encouraging. And when I was boarding the plane, I passed him and I gave him a verbal fist bump, because I don't always have the patience to continue with people who shut down like that. And I was very impressed with the way he did it. And it's something that we can all, it's a lot of it is just that sense of, I mean, there's vulnerability. I might get shot down. There's also sheer exhaustion.
Mhm.
It's so tiring trying to break through people who are set in their ways. But it's good we could start here in this
Was
forum.
was the person who made the comment about the difference between you and me, was he older than the person to
Yes,
whom he said it?
yes, yeah,
I have to give that younger person credit too, because that person could have just gone off,
right.
but stuck around. That's impressive, and I wish I didn't have to think rare.
But it does show that sometimes if you can just give people a chance, give them a little bit of an opening, show them just a little bit of where, okay, maybe I can redirect,
Mhm.
rather than, okay, you shut down, so I have the right to shut down myself.
That's good.
That's hard. It is hard.
And I also think, and I'm not a psychologist, but I think sometimes people look for opportunities to be defensive.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
And if you don't give them one, that's very disarming to them. And
Mhm.
sometimes they'll come around and sometimes they'll just not have any idea what to do.
Yeah, and I think the best strategy when someone pushes you is to take a step back,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
because that puts them off balance and it also brings them towards you.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
That's
I like
good.
that.
So maybe that's a good place to wrap up the conversation until we can get to the part two. For those of you who are enjoying this conversation, if you'd like to become a premium member, you have access to the backstage conversation, which will continue from this point forward. Go to my Substack, look for the information on how to apply to that. For today, William Attaway, Mark O'Brien, Sue Tinnish, thank you so much for a very most engaging, thoughtful conversation. And the viewers and listeners, if you have a topic you would like us to take up, please go to my website, ethicsninja.com. Use the contact information, submit your idea. If it's compelling, we will take it up for a future episode. Until then, we encourage you to continue, as always, grappling with the gray.